Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. You know, it's interesting, in the 16 years that we have been here, and specifically within the last year and a half, we've had all the constitutional officers from the state of Minnesota. There are 5 of them. But since his election, we have not had Secretary of State Steve Simon. Well, in doing research for this, I recognize, because he hasn't stopped long enough to have an interview, I don't know of anybody who has accomplished as much and been as busy as you have since your election.
Well, thank you for saying so. I tried to hit the ground running, and I've really tried to be as active as I can be. I'm happy to hear that I'm bringing up the rear on your show in terms of constitutional officers. It's a pleasure to be here. But yeah, I have been busy. And not just in terms of what we do here in St. Paul, but I've really made it a priority to get out of St. Paul. I quickly concluded in this job that you can't do this job well by just sitting at a desk in the capital area. You've got to get out and about, and we have too many partnerships, whether it's on the election side, whether it's on the business side of what we do, or whether it's on the domestic abuse side of what we do, and I assume we might get into that on your show. But on all 3 of those, and on other dimensions as well, we have a lot of relationships and partnerships, and they rightly expect that we will be trying to strengthen those partnerships, and that means face-to-face meetings. And so I've gotten now to a
You
good part
were
of
one
the
of the busiest members of the House. You ran 5 times, you were elected 5 times, and a natural procedure, I think, just that you gravitated to one of the state offices, and you had to have a vision for what this office is all about. Why don't you share that with us?
Well, most people, when they think of this office, think of the elections work that we do. In fact, when I was campaigning for this office, I would say that 98% of the questions I got, and the comments that I got, or the insights I got, were about the elections function. So let me start there. I see this office as really the guardian of the right to vote, and always needing to strengthen and preserve and protect the right to vote. So for me, I distill that into one clear mission. I want to make it as easy as possible for all eligible Minnesotans to vote, period. And that really is what guides me day in and day out. I think it's very important for a lot of reasons we can talk about, but that really is kind of the signal responsibility that I see for myself in this office.
And you followed in the steps of Mark Ritchie, who had the same philosophy,
I think
and did an outstanding job in 2 really contested elections, where he got national recognition.
Right.
I had no doubt that you would be the same. But you mentioned one thing. You mentioned domestic violence.
Right.
And how that reflects on your office. And I know that was also a cause of yours when you were in the House.
Yeah.
So talk about that and your attention directed toward that.
Sure. Well, I'm pleased to be in a position now as Secretary of State where I get to administer a program which really helps people who are victims of domestic violence. We run a program called the Safe at Home program. And Safe at Home is an address confidentiality or address anonymity program that allows people who fear for their safety, fear for their lives, fear for the lives and safety of their families, to have an anonymous and confidential physical address. So it means that our office and our office alone knows where their true physical address is, and we, in essence, act as their mailbox. So if there's a victim of domestic violence who fears for her safety and the safety of her children, we and only we know where she truly resides, and so we handle interactions between that person and that family and the outside world, most typically with the mail. And I will tell you,
In effect, a witness protection program, but for victims of domestic violence.
Some have used that analogy, and it's a little bit apples and oranges, but I would say the same principle applies. It protects people, it provides an umbrella, it provides a real sort of safety net for a lot of people. And I will tell you that the people I've talked to around the state who are our partners, whether it's in domestic violence protection organizations, whether it's in law enforcement, they have said outright, this program has saved lives. And that really makes me happy. Because
and tragically, if we pick up the papers, even today, I saw 2 domestic violence cases that resulted in deaths. And it is almost epidemic. So we can't emphasize too much the importance of what your office does in that regard.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And so going forward, we want to maintain the credibility and the security of that program. It is ultra secure, so secure, in fact, that I myself do not know the location of the Safe at Home office. We have a number of employees in the office dedicated to just that function and just that program. They have a separate office. I don't know what city it's in. I don't know whether it's in a high-rise building or a storefront, and I think that's a good thing because I don't need to know. When I need to meet with the folks who run the program, we meet in my office. And so I want folks out there who are watching this program who might know someone in need of the services and the protection of the Safe at Home program to know we treat the confidentiality aspect of this extremely seriously, so seriously that I don't even know where they work.
I didn't know that,
Yeah.
and that's a very, very impressive fact. Now, you've also devoted a lot of time to make it easier for members of the armed forces, particularly the National Guard, to vote.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I've been involved with elections issues for a long time. During my life as a legislator, for 10 years, they were my real passion. The last 2 years, I was the chair of the House Elections Committee. But it wasn't until I took this office in January of 2015 that I came to realize, along with others, there was a glaring inequality in state law when it came to members of our military. Strangely, and inexplicably, I think, there was a double standard. In this way, members of our National Guard who were called to active duty by a President of the United States, say to go overseas, to be in Iraq or Afghanistan, they were entitled to certain privileges, certain shortcuts, certain accommodations when it came to voting. And the most prominent example is that they are not required, as the rest of us are, to have a witness on their absentee ballot. There are others, but that's one that I think most people can relate to. And so they were entitled to those shortcuts, so to speak. But a member of the National Guard that was called to active duty service by a governor, say to help out in case of a natural disaster, to stuff sandbags at the side of a swollen river, that person was not entitled to those same protections. And it seemed to me that if someone puts on the uniform of this country and puts themselves in harm's way, they deserve those protections no matter who calls them to active duty service. So one of my early priorities was to get a bill passed to get rid of that distinction and that really discrimination, and we did that. So now everyone is treated the same and treated equally, and that's the right thing.
And it wasn't so easy to get bills passed in this particular past legislature, which has 1 year left in any event.
Right.
But I know from the time that you were in the legislature that you had the reputation of working both sides of the aisle. And that's a reputation that's not only valuable, but it's hard to come by.
Yeah, I think.
And you did that, and obviously with the voting rights of National Guard members, it worked.
I think the key to getting things done in the Minnesota legislature is you have to try to find common ground. And it's particularly important when it comes to elections issues. And the reason for that is that former Governor Tim Pawlenty, implicitly, but current Governor Mark Dayton very clearly and explicitly have said that they would only sign elections-related bills into law if they had bipartisan support. So Governor Dayton's been absolutely straightforward about that, meaning even last year when Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the governorship, the governor still imposed that condition on his signature, which means that by definition, I have to, if I want to get anything passed in the elections area, get Republicans and Democrats on board. Maybe not in equal measure, but you have to have some critical mass from both parties, and I've been able to do that.
Which, you know, is just one more accolade that you can put to the short time that you have been in office. What about time off to vote? I know you've been involved with that.
Yes. So coming into office, one other thing that was murky, to say the least, in Minnesota law was the extent to which any of us who are employees get time off to vote. It wasn't clear whether it really applied to all elections all the time. So we went in, talked to legislators of both parties. I did myself, and members of my staff did, and we got common ground and consensus on that. That at the very least, we should clarify that every employee in Minnesota gets time off from work to vote in a regularly scheduled election. That could be a primary, that could be a general. It could be for President of the United States, or it could be for a township board in greater Minnesota. The point is, if it's a regularly scheduled election, all of us get time off from our employer. And I think that's the right thing to do. To the extent that that moves the needle even just a little bit towards more participation, that's a positive development.
And of course, you talk about more participation.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many people who are eligible to vote who don't.
Right.
I think in this state alone there's 800,000.
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And you have been very active in that regard to try to get these people to register, to get these people to vote, to make it easier for them to register. And I know you've spent time in high schools talking to students about the importance of this, which I think encompasses your travels. You've probably worn out a set of tires already.
Yes, at least one. Well, I would say this. The name of your show are it sort of comprises words to live by for my office, which is, it is about access to democracy. And that's what voting is. Voting is our voice. And the first step to making sure that voice is used is voter registration. So it's never been easier than it is now to register to vote. In fact, if your listeners and your viewers are curious, just go to mnvotes.org. That's mnvotes.org, and we can now register people to vote online. But it's terribly important because, yeah, we have 800,000 people in Minnesota that are eligible to vote but are not even registered to vote. And you can register to vote online. You can go online and download the paper copy if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, or if you don't have online access or don't want to bother with it, you can go to any government office in all 87 counties, in multiple languages, by the way, online and on paper. But in the paper part, you can go and you pick up the form and you can register to vote. And let's not forget, Minnesota has on the books and has had for 40 years same day or election day voter registration, which means that any of us could roll out of bed the morning of an election, go to our polling places, and with proper proof of residence can register and vote that very same day. So there are multiple avenues and ways for people to get involved. But I like to say our vote is our voice. And if you'll allow me just one quick story on the importance of voting, particularly for young people. And when I do speak to college or high school audiences or young audiences in general, I mention this. So when I was campaigning for this job, I did a lot of parades. And I was at one parade in Rochester, Minnesota last year, and I saw someone wearing a T-shirt that really caught my eye, and a T-shirt that's really stuck with me since then. I don't know who she was or what organization she was with. The T-shirt said, "Failure to vote is not an act of rebellion, it's an act of surrender." Those are wise words, particularly for young people, because I do understand, I really do. I understand the impulse from young people in particular to think of a conscious decision not to vote as some sort of act of rebellion, a way to stick it to people or a process that they don't like, that makes them disillusioned or even disgusted. I understand that impulse. But at the end of the day, what I say is, you've got power. And when you turned 18 a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, you had this new power. Don't surrender it. Don't give it up. Don't leave it on the table, because if you leave it on the table, someone else is going to take what you leave on the table. And that someone else may, in the end, contribute to someone getting into office who doesn't share your views and values, who's going to make decisions for you and about you without you. And that's no good. We don't want that.
And we've seen the results of low voting in terms of some of the really turmoil we have around the country right now, which is a direct result of that.
I think that's right.
It's tragic. And I taught in college for a number of years. And even though this wasn't my subject, I would always bring it up. Two things. I would ask, how many students here get a newspaper and read it every day? On a class of 50, I might get one hand up, because they live by really their cell phones or whatever. And the other thing I would say is, how many of you are registered to vote? Why aren't you registered to vote? And a lot of time they would say, it does us no good. Congress doesn't do anything. We're unhappy with the legislature. What does my vote mean? And we get into a discussion about what your vote means. And the fact of the matter is, if there's enough of your votes, the result changes.
Exactly right. And I think, you know, the older people get naturally, they tend to understand that. But I think for young people in particular, you know, I'll tell you my sort of overall theory about voter engagement and about getting people registered and voting. There are two broadly speaking, branches of the tree. One is an appeal to people's sense of duty, to say, look, this is a civic duty. There are those who came before us who fought and bled and sometimes died for this right. It's the right thing to do to make sure we can maintain what we have. That is a great message. It touches a lot of us, I'm sure you and I included, but not everyone, and particularly not as much young people. I believe that the second main branch is to appeal to people's self-interest. Not selfishness, they're not the same, but self-interest. In saying, you have this power, it belongs to you, it's been given to you, don't leave it on the table. Don't surrender it, because it's in your interest to vote. It's not just an eat your vegetables, it's the right thing to do approach, but it's in your interest to get out there and vote. And by the way, another thing I say to young people isn't just about registration itself, it's about how easy it is now to actually vote. One of the things that I'm proudest of that I did in my entire legislative career was in this area, where I wrote the bill for what we have now, which is no excuses absentee voting. So the old system before last year was, if you wanted to vote absentee, wanted to vote from home, you needed to furnish an excuse that was among a list of government-sanctioned excuses, like, I'm going to be out of town that day. For the first time ever last election, we had the situation where there is no excuse anymore. Any one of us can vote from our kitchen table, we can vote from our couch, we can vote from wherever for any reason or no reason. And so I say to that young person who's maybe carrying a full credit load, who has a part-time job or maybe two, who has family issues or medical issues or whatever's going on in their lives that makes it appear inconvenient to vote, you don't have to even go to a polling place anymore. You can vote from your dorm room, vote from your couch. All you have to do is go to mnvotes.org, register to vote if you aren't already, order the ballot online, it comes to you, you fill it out, you get a witness to sign it, and you mail it back. It's never been easier for young people to vote.
And it's so important.
Yes.
And we have to keep renewing that message between now and next year, because the life that you're making better is basically your own.
Right.
And we have seen states that have made terrible mistakes by lack of participation. And people complaining about the result, then you ask them, well, did you vote? Well, no, it wouldn't have done any good.
Right.
It would have done good.
Absolutely.
And they have to know that. You've also done something with the ballot to make the ballot easier to comprehend.
Right. Well, we had some crazy, really outdated rules and laws on the books about ballot format. I mean, believe it or not, and your viewers might recall this, but all the names of candidates, for example, had to be in capital letters, and there were certain spacing requirements and all the rest. And you know, you read all the literature about readability and what's pleasing or easy on the eye, whether it's ballots or anything else. And we went to the legislature and said, look, these are outdated rules and laws, and on a bipartisan basis they agreed. Bottom line is, we're leaving more freedom and flexibility to design ballots that are more catching to the eye, that aren't all capital letters, that people will actually look at and perhaps read in more detail. So that was something I would put under a more technical heading, but something that in the long run I think could be a really good thing.
Now this year we are celebrating the 50th year of the Voting Rights Act. And I know you've done a couple of unique things with regard to that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Sure.
Let's talk about September being Voter Participation Month.
Right.
And September 22nd, only last week.
Right.
Or this week, actually.
Yeah.
Being Voter Participation Day.
Right.
But your office has really made great strides in that regard.
You know, when I was campaigning for this office, looking ahead, I knew that the summer of 2015 would be the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, a game-changing piece of legislation. I mean, I'm sure as your viewers know, life for millions of Americans was so different before the Voting Rights Act. I'm talking about vast areas of this country, not just in the Deep South, by the way, where you had poll taxes, so-called character tests, so-called literacy tests, and with the stroke of a pen, on August 6, 1965, those were, at least legally speaking, wiped away.
Right.
But there's a Minnesota story that I knew I wanted to tell, and that we have told as an office this summer and fall. In 1965, Minnesota had a very closely divided congressional delegation. The House was 50-50, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and they were at each other's throats on a lot of issues: Vietnam, Medicare, immigration, a whole host of issues. But when the roll was called on that bill, which was controversial in its time, when the roll was called, Minnesota really spoke with one voice, and we were one of the states, the proud states, that was unanimous. All the Democrats, all the Republicans, liberal, conservative, greater Minnesota, metro, didn't matter. They all voted unanimously for it. What that tells me is, number one, they did the right thing, under some pressure to do the wrong thing. Number two, once upon a time, our tradition in Minnesota was more agreement than disagreement on the big issues, the big moral issues around access to democracy and around voting and around participation. And I want to get us back closer to that moment. Not, by the way, total agreement and unanimity all the time. That's neither practical nor particularly healthy. I think in a democracy you want some vigorous disagreement. So that's not what I'm arguing. What I am arguing is on the big moral question of who gets to participate in our democracy. We ought to be in agreement more times than we are disagreeing, and I want to get us to that place again.
And there's a reason why Minnesota has always been looked to as an outstanding state, a progressive state, not necessarily in a liberal bent, but progressive.
Right.
There's a reason why our Supreme Court has always been looked at as one of the better Supreme Courts in the nation, and those reasons are the same reasons that you're talking about right now. And it's just so important. At this stage of my life, I realized that these values are slipping away with a lot of people, and we really need to do what you are doing so forcefully and so positively.
Well, what I'm trying to do is use occasions like the 50th anniversary, or as you alluded to, the fact that September has been declared as National Voter Registration Month. I'm trying to use those occasions, those anniversaries, those milestones, as an excuse to talk about registering to vote, to talk about voting, to talk about participation, and that's what we're doing, not only with young people. I've been to high schools and college audiences, but to everyone around Minnesota. It's true we have a good thing going, and I like to talk in Olympic terms about the fact that we're almost always on the medal stand in Minnesota. We're almost always gold, silver, or bronze when it comes to turnout.
Good analogy.
We fell off the medal stand in 2014. We were 6th, but most states would kill to be 6th. The point is we have a good thing going, but we have a lot more to do, not only in terms of the numbers, the 800,000 who are eligible but not even registered, but also in terms of making sure that we're reaching out to newer communities, younger communities, others who are traditionally either left out or take themselves out of the process. I think that's important. We can do even better, and we can get rid of some of the barriers that exist. And there are such barriers, by the way, though I've said that it's never been easier to register, and in many ways never been easier to vote. Make no mistake, there are still barriers out there. And if you'll permit me just one example that shocks most people who hear it, there are many, but let me just focus on one. Believe it or not, Minnesota has a law on the books that only one other state in the country has. Arkansas is that other state. Minnesota and Arkansas limit the number of people that you or I or any other good Samaritan going to the polling place can help. And the number is 3. We can only help 3 people. No other state in the country, the other 48, have any such limit, let alone 3. So if you or I went to a polling place together and we saw one person in a walker, one person in a wheelchair, and one immigrant who was having a little difficulty with English language instructions, we could help them, but not a 4th. We couldn't help a 4th person. That makes no sense to me.
That law must have gray hair.
It's beyond gray hair. I think it's almost silly. So I've been working to get that off the books. Doesn't make any sense. There's no reason we should be in a club of 2 states, including Arkansas, to have this law. So I think we ought to ditch it.
Especially with Arkansas.
Well, it doesn't matter what the state is, really. I think we should ditch it in any event, and we'll get there.
Now, you did something on August 6th that was rather unique also, the Landmark Center.
Right. That was really a special moment, and as long as I am privileged to serve in this office, I may not have another moment as impactful as that one. August 6th, well, we did two events that were connected with one another. August 6th was the actual anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and in connection with that date, we first honored the living members of the Minnesota Congressional District, delegation rather, from 1965. So Walter Mondale, Al Quie, Don Fraser, and Alec Olson are the four members still living of that delegation. And they recounted their experiences, their personal recollections, and it was fascinating. And we were able to honor them with some medallions, honoring them for doing the gutsy and right thing in 1965. And then we segued into an event that was a community-based, more grassroots event, where we talked to various communities around our state about the importance of voting, talked about the barriers that still exist, and tried to illuminate for those in attendance and others through video and other communications, you know, the need to go beyond just the 50th anniversary, talk about and dismantle the barriers that are still there. So it was a really special experience. We were able to harness the energy behind that 50th anniversary and talk about the work of this office, which is access to democracy.
And, you know, I can just feel the energy coming from you as you talk about these things. And at this point, I usually frighten the hell out of the control room when I want to go to a new topic and we only have a minute left.
It's
and they
okay.
say, you make us nervous when you do that.
That's
because
all right.
we can't run over. But there are so many other things that your office does and is involved in, that I hope you'll come back and talk to us about some of those. And as we're talking about voting, also remind people again and again how important it is, as we are trying to do. You said it, access to democracy. We have it, but we don't want to lose it. We can't afford to lose it. And we've been talking with a very energetic and innovative Secretary of State, Steve Simon, who is here for the first time, but I certainly hope not the last time, as we try to make this country a little bit better. And Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.